Good evening, folks. It's Diamond with the Oppenheimer Ranch Project and Magnetic Reversal News. And we've got Matt Powers, the permaculture student, live on the air right now for the second time in a week. It's a tweak. He's an awesome guy. He's a musician. He's an educator. He's an author. He's a father. And he's a family man. And not only that, he's a permaculturalist, and we got so much to talk about that we could talk all the time, but we're so busy that we're going to record it for you to enjoy. And tonight, our show is going to be about biodynamic agriculture, biodynamic farming, biodynamics in general, because it cultivates biodiversity, and it's a way for abundance and to save the planet. Welcome to the show, Matt. How the heck are you?
I am doing so well. I have been outside working in the soil. I have been outside actually clearing brush for fire safety a lot this week. So, yeah, I'm a little bit sticky with pine sap.
All right, so we're going to talk about biodiversity and biodynamics in general. You're very familiar with this, and I did a little video today about a general synopsis on biodynamics, and it's a closed loop idea. It's a system of farming where everything in the system is beneficial in some way, and it's indicative of permaculture principles because it's using those principles. So it's like an early form of permaculture, and this all comes from the work of Rudolf Steiner, who was born in 1961, but right at the turn of the century, he was an esoteric scientist in many fields, and a lot of the agriculturalists and farmers asked him in the early 1900s to help out with agriculture. And in June of 1924, Steiner finally held an agriculture course. Now, this was in a small German village, which is now in Poland, actually. But the 8 lectures and 5 discussions of that course are now transcribed in the book Agriculture and are literally a treasure trove of information, the cutting edge, the beginning of permaculture, biodynamic farming, and absolute abundance and saving the planet. And I know you know a lot about it, so what do you want to say about the beginning of all this? Go.
Yeah, so this is the precursor for organic farming. And I would also say, though, that this seems like the beginning of the story. This is actually a moment where a scientist is watching the disappearance of a way of life, of a way of organic agriculture, many ways of organic agriculture, as chemical agriculture was arriving in Europe and starting to take over. All these different ways of life started disappearing. And Rudolf Steiner, in many ways, was trying to capture and make sense and create a scientific understanding, like a coherent system of understanding of all these folk methods for growing soil, for developing plants, all these different things. He was gathering the information at this transition point. And so many people, when they talk about permaculture, they're like, yeah, but isn't that just like indigenous information that you guys are just rehashing and calling American now? And it's like, actually, it's an Australian concept, but it's actually all the indigenous and all the modern looked through a proper lens so that you can use all of them fluently. And I think that that's what this really gets down to, is this was a moment where he was able to solidify what all those different disciplines were practicing, but not really preaching. He was able to create a system of understanding, principles, and then clearly communicate them and why they were advantageous to other people. And so instead of it being, I'm going to hand this down to my child and then it's going to hand down to his children, in our village, things were changing rapidly. The world was changing rapidly. And that no longer was going to be the way that we transmitted information. I mean, it's the late 1800s. They're in the midst of the Industrial Revolution. Jobs are shifting from craftsmen for over 100 years has been shifting to industrialization in so many different ways. So he, in many ways, is one of those people who gathered in the precious messages, work, and time-honored traditions of our ancestors. And in many ways, I would say that what he was capturing was a lot of the indigenous practices of Europe before industrialization wiped a lot of those things out. Because and you could, there's many arguments, right? Like the Romans really wiped out indigenous Europe, you know what I mean? But of course, in the country, in those outer reaches where people were in towns and just living family to family to family generationally, those traditions did remain. So we see this link between the past and the present, carrying on these treasures, these insights that our ancestors have had. And Rudolf Steiner is often misunderstood because of the amount that he translated, the depths, to which he went. It leaves people often being like, well, I need a soil chart, and where's my NPK? You know what I mean? But their methods are proven, and they continue to be proven. And there's a reason why biodynamic is exponentially growing in the market and not in decline.
I can't agree with you more. Now, this Rudolf Steiner was so groundbreaking. He took all of these little nooks and crannies of information from ancient cultures and their farming methodology, and he concisely put it into a little amazing packet. He was the first human to bring the perspective that the farm is a single self-sustaining organism, and it thrives through biodiversity, which is the integration of crops, livestock, meadow, all the weeds, all the flowers, everything in abundance, growing thick and deep, and all the mycorrhiza and the microorganisms and the bugs and the birds and the poop, all working in harmony, like a gorgeous orchestra. And he also brought in the interplay of cosmic and earthly influences. So also, the mind, the body, the spirit, you are part of the farm's network. And that brings it into esoteric realms.
So I learned more about this. I was rereading Strange in a Strange Land for the 12th time or something. And I'm rereading it, and I'm watching this character, Jubal Harshaw, talk about how the Muslims would plant, he said the Moors, I think that it shows the time period, right, of the book. He goes, the Moors plant by the moon. And I was like, wait a second. Click. And I'm looking it up. And yes, because they were a lunar calendar people, they based everything off of the cycles of the moon. Moon planting is Middle Eastern. It's Arabic. Totally wild. And yeah. There's some really incredible history with that. I love actually tracing all of this stuff in the original documents because you can find it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Farmer's Almanac today uses the moon cycles and other types of cycles, climate cycles, the cycles of the sun, all to determine planting. And this is because of cosmogenic environment, which is also directly connected to astrology. And we can get very esoteric when we talk about this. But it is the work of Steiner that actually brought and pioneered the concept of community-supported agriculture. So while you have these miniature biodynamic farms that are working completely sustainably, each farm is unique in producing its own products, and then you can bring it all downtown and have a farmer's market or share it with the community in little slivers. This CSA is absolutely, thriving across the United States and worldwide, and it is driving these types of small farms. And I think it's totally awesome. What say you?
I didn't know that he created the CSA model. I had to put that into the third edition of my book. That's what I say to that. Yeah, that's amazing. I had no idea. That's the thing with someone like Steiner, who does something like permaculture, where it's like a theory for everything, is there's always nooks and crannies that you miss or forget. That is awesome.
Yeah, he by
So
applying
what
his
else?
applying his diverse ideas and methods, biodynamic farmers have now established a worldwide reputation for creating socially responsible farms of extraordinary health and beauty, and for producing organic products of the highest quality and flavor. When people come to my farm and they look at the pigs and of 60 chickens and it doesn't smell, they're quite curious. And the plants are all really green.
Yeah, and I think actually we talked so much now about foliar sprays. Everyone's fermenting things and making compost teas, but that kind of stuff was like considered like witchcraft. You know what I mean? The MPK Bible was what everyone was taught everywhere, and then this biodynamic, they're fermenting things inside of, manure inside of cow horns. They're wanting to keep everything on the farm. There's this bar that is set that seems completely ludicrous to the NPK folk. And then we see that it works, and that's really where so many of these practices came from. And then we started seeing that there were similar practices in other parts of the world, Korean natural farming, Matsunuba Fukuoka, those kinds of things. But that's so recent. So this was a pioneer. I mean, he really is the pioneer for so much of what we do, like actually action. You know what I mean? That we do, and so many of the studies that we're still working on. I mean, think about the fact that compost in the 90s was still questionable. Like sometimes compost would kill things and sometimes it would make things grow really well, and they didn't know why. They didn't understand like anaerobic, aerobic. They didn't understand like the acidic, versus alkaline versus bacterial versus fungal, all those kinds of connections. And then they didn't understand how many, of the soil members they needed. And they were killing things with compost, and they were scientists. So in the 90s. So it's really wild to think about that. It's like almost like they were trying to relearn, right? What he was already doing and showing that people had been doing for a very long time. It's a really important thing to understand that Rudolf Steiner didn't invent this stuff. He might have improvised and had insights and created things and techniques, no doubt. But this information comes from study, from research, from interaction with real farmers who had been doing this traditionally in their town community with those plants for we don't know how many generations. So it's really important to like this next thing where like Rudolf Steiner's quackery. It's like it's actually like he's a documenter and he's trying to make sense of this information, and he saw the results. It wasn't like he walked up to the farmer and was like, "Wow, your field's awful. What are you doing?" No, he walked up to people who were doing amazing things and interviewed those people. And it was because they had good products that he actually documented their processes. And that's why we have them.
Yeah, he was a quack. He was one of the first anti-vaxxers, and his predictions have come true. He said that if we go with the mechanistic NPK chemical fertilizer big ag idea, that what would happen in a course of just a few decades is that the flavor and the content of nutrition in our food would slowly decrease, and that the entire human population would be sick, which is sounds very familiar to where we are today.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, you read Brave New World, you read 1984, you read, I mean, there was this 50 to 60-year time period, right around the 19th century where you had these prophetic people that were really lambasted and ridiculed. And they were spot on. Yeah, I mean, the reality is I want my immunity to be inheritable. And I say this to everyone when this argument comes up. It's like, yeah, I understand what the science behind it and how it works. I mean, I read the special like kids book when I was little over and over again. I remember the Value Tales books, the white books and the cartoon. Remember this? And like Louis Pasteur gave him an inoculation after he got rabies, not before. And so I understood that it worked, that all this stuff. But then I was like, wait a second, but none of this is inheritable. And then I was watching everyone around me get sicker and weaker and sicker and weaker. Like over the course of my life, I've seen this. And it just occurs to me that what we want is natural. And that requires hard work and diligence and real interaction with the natural world. We can't just like pay to circumvent and expect, like, I mean, all right, so what's going on essentially is we're stepping outside the game with vaccines. We're taking a break on the sidelines and letting the microbes continue to play the game against the thing that we injected. But we don't inherit that thing. That's not us. So we're actually not getting stronger or wiser genetically. And we're not calibrating with our environment. So if we're not calibrating with our environment, with the microbes of our environment in the soil or in our food and in the, you know, the disease, the viral, all those kinds of things, which are all over us in everything, you know, right? If you're not, you know, involved in that, they're going to progress and you're going to be left behind, and then they're going to interact again and it's going to be bad. I mean, look at what happened when Native Americans encountered the Europeans, you know, diseases and germs and everything. That sort of thing is what we're creating right now. And so I really want immunity, immunological strength, and maybe we don't even want immunological strength. I mean, if you look at Wim Hof, he's bypassing his immune system and having stuff come out of his bones that is destroying the toxins in his blood. It's a new pathway for fighting things, and it's not immune system. It suppressed his immune system. So it's almost like we're just beginning to understand the human body, what it actually can do to disease, virus, germs, all those things, what those things actually are, perhaps, too. And so when we talk about these things, it's all really epigenetic. So if we really want strong immune systems, we need to be eating the best food, we need to be working out, we need to be living the best way, and then we need to be thinking the best, right? We need to be having powerful, empowering thoughts. We need to not be discouraged and passive aggressive, and, you know, like all that stuff literally downregulates your genes. And so I want real strength. I want real resilience. I want real health. And the stuff in the shot is not going to give it to you because you can't pass it on. It's a Band-Aid, and that's why they want to give you a shot constantly, because they're worried the Band-Aids don't work. Because the viruses are smart, the germs are smart, the natural world's adapting constantly around us, and we're just out of sync. I mean, I know some people, like, you know, have tons of opinions about, you know, germs and diseases and viruses, about where we fall with that, but nonetheless, if we get out of sync with nature, just the basic idea of being out of sync with our proper place in the cycle, that creates disease. So if we're outside of that loop of the soil to our waste, back to this, you're like our humanure waste. If you don't have healthy humanure going back into the soil, going back into the food that you are growing, and all done properly, don't get me wrong, you're missing something. We all are. And that is, like, you know, a really high bar to set, but these are the kind of things that Rudolf Steiner was talking about, you know, 100 years ago.
Yeah, let's talk about micronutrients, because if we want to epigenetically be more resilient humans with better immune systems, we need the micronutrients that they've been preventing us from getting. Now, studies have been done, indigenous cultures that have huge inputs of micronutrients, specifically ones in the Himalayas, in east-west valleys, where the rivers that they irrigate with have glacial dust, similar to the river out front here, where I live. These people have healthier teeth, healthier vision, very little degenerative disease, and it's because of the micronutrients. And if we follow the money back into the turn of the century, we can find out what happened with agriculture. There was a fight between Liebig, who was an advocate of the chemical fertilization monopoly, and Julius Hensel, which is the greatest figure in the history of agricultural chemistry ever. Now, the enemies, the members of the Octopus Chemical Fertilizer Trust, absolutely crushed Hensel. They suppressed his memory, destroyed his books, and they eliminated the stone meal fertilizer from the market, which we now know today as azomite or rock dust or granite dust. And he concluded at the turn of the century that all we needed to improve our agriculture was to add rock dust, nothing else. But he lost the fight with Liebig and Big Ag, and now we all use NPK and GMO and glyphosate tolerant and blah, blah, blah. And we've been losing nutrients for 120 years from the human race. That's why we're sick. And this is just some information that almost nobody knows. And we can change it. And I believe that you believe that too, Matt.
We absolutely can change it. I know people who are changing it. I mean, if you look at, stuff like this stuff Restore made by Dr. Zach Bush, this is a doctor who, and this stuff is healing people with gut problems. And let's look at the name, aqueous humic substances. It's called terrahydrite. It's literally soil water. It's the micronutrients, the minerals of the soil. And if you're like, oh, well, what is it exactly? I think it actually tells you here. There's like, well, another thing did that. Anyway, I think the thing online did that. But yeah, it'll tell you exactly what humic substances there are in it. It's wild, but that's all it is. Our soil, we're humus beings, right? We're humans, and we're missing the full palette of our soil, so we're missing the full palette of our humanity. And it's that bare bones, basic fact that is causing all these problems. Our disconnection with, like, I feel like depressed, I feel alone, and I'm surrounded by people, all these things. It's because you're missing those minerals. And not only that, we have too many of other minerals, right? People are high in copper, people are high in lead, people are high, all these not so good things at all. And so you've got these crazy imbalances. And often our ancestors did that dirty work too, but because they had all the wide palette, the broad spectrum, they were able to handle it. Yeah, it's really, really wild. It's basically, it's a crime against humanity, right? And if you dig into it, almost every government is part of this, because they wanted to grow their population, they wanted to feed armies, they wanted to, all those kinds of things. They wanted workers, they wanted plentiful food, they didn't want, food shortages. So they went to the lowest common denominator. They created stuff you could see, but not stuff that really truly nourished. They created, like seafood, not like real food. And it's kind of I think it's, like, in many ways a cautionary tale, because if you look at the history that went into the creation of the whole NPK revolution, it's dark. It's not nice. The Haber-Bosch process, one of them fled Europe because the Nazis were going to kill him, and then the other used that technology to create all the bombs and all the fertilizer. And that was like the engine of the Nazi war machine. And so from that, and then once the war ended, that technology went all over the world. And when we opened that technology up to other people in the world, it became the Green Revolution. And that's what caused all the population booms and the sickness booms alongside it. Because what happens when we, let's do this, and everyone knows this who's grown food before. Let's say you overwater. What kind of plants are you going to get? You're going to be spindly, they're going to be thin, they're going to be water weak, they're going to be sprouts. And if you get fruit on there at all, the fruit's just going to be tasteless. And then bugs are going to come and destroy it. A fungi is going to come and just ruin it. And it's because that's just mostly water with hardly a nutrient to speak of. And that's what's happened to us as a people, is that we've just been strung out on this fake food, and now we are paying the due out of I mean, we're paying with our bone, you know what I mean? Like, it's coming right out of us. So yeah.
Well, yeah, 100 years ago, Hensel's book, Bread from Stones, which you can get a free PDF online if you search it, Bread from Stones was his controversial book. It concluded that the use of chemical fertilizers would lead to the following consequences: it will poison the soil, destroying beneficial soil bacteria, earthworms, and humus. It will create unhealthy, unbalanced, mineral deficient plants, lacking resistance to disease, insects, and other pests, thus leading to the spraying of other crap in order to prevent this. It will then lead to diseases among animals and men who feed on these abnormal plants and their products. And it will lead to a tremendous expense to the farmer because chemical fertilizers, being extremely soluble, are quick to be washed from the soil. And rainfall needs constant replacement or else the plants wither and die. I mean, he was a genius. We knew this, we've known this for 100 years, and everyone wonders why they're sick.
It's crazy. It's like we were constantly relearning our own history. If you go back and study like Archimedes, the things that he was doing, that the Antikythera device definitely was Archimedes' creation. We basically are we are prone to amnesia, we are prone to self-destruct, historically speaking, and it's resisting that we, you know what I mean, that top-down destruction that usually comes from just misguiding us and miseducating us and poisoning us throughout time. We've got to step up this time and protect our families from falling down that same path again.
Well, how do we do that? How about the people that live in apartments or in inner cities? What are they going to do?
Yeah, so the number one thing I would do in the city, and this is something that I do outside of the city, because if there's an interruption in service, I want to be able to make things happen, right? And so I'm really into growing highly mineral dense foods, but it's really important, like before things get too, crazy, that we do everything that we can with the resources we have now. I'm just going to say that first. So if you can get rock dust and put it out over your quarter of an acre or 800 acres, do it. It's cheap. Even that 800 acres, it will pay for itself. It's not that expensive. So do the due diligence, get that going. But I would have the biology there to unlock all the minerals that are there in the soil, and then I would do things to attract birds and as much wildlife as possible to bring in nutrients and minerals. Birds bring in tons of nutrients and minerals, especially because they travel. They're gatherers, really. And so if you provide places for birds, ducks, wildlife, you can actually get a lot of biodiversity in your soil happening. But specifically with minerals, we have seaweeds, we have the rock dusts, and then we have different forms of composting that are going to have different populations of fungi and bacteria. And fungi primarily breaks down the harder compounds, but there are bacteria that can work on rock too. So they both can do it. But the idea is that we have the life there in the soil because they literally turn the sand, the silt, and the clay into soluble minerals. So fungi can, like mycelium, right? They can reach into rock and they can pull out the particular molecule they want. They can mine the rock for the elements that they want. It's really, really wild. And then they can trade it to a plant for strings of carbon, chains of carbon that come from photosynthesis as they use the sunlight's energy to break CO2, releasing oxygen and turning those carbon, molecules into these long chains, making sugars that they trade in the soil, and then they get sequestered in the soil, and they use that also to grow and to create their fruits and all that stuff, and sap, but primarily it's part of this economy. And so I always, that's where I always go. Actually, even before I learned a lot about rock dust, even before I even learned about seaweed and all those kind of mineral things, I would actually always focus on ramping up the fungi and the bacteria in the soil and creating compost teas, creating thermophilic vermicompost and moldering compost and combining them, even putting like kefir grains, water kefir grains in there. I know it's crazy, but they can eat anything. So having that in there and then putting that onto my soil as a soil drench, I had, bulletproof soils that went to my shoulder deep. That was chocolate loam. And people were came to my house who were neighbors and locals, farmers, who multiple generation farmers came to my house and were just flabbergasted. They're like, Matt, this soil doesn't belong here. Where did you get it? And I was like, I made it. And they were like, when? I was here. Where did this come from? And it was because I brought the life in. So I totally know the science. I've been educated by so many different scientists now one-on-one on both my podcast and personally as I've been writing and researching my books and working with peer reviewers. And so, no, I totally respect and I'm all about the rock dust because let me provide a caveat that you've probably never heard of. 80% of soil life relies upon cobalt being there. Why? Well, if you look at the B12 molecule, the center of it has this centerpiece that holds it all together. You pull that out and it all falls apart. That's cobalt. So without cobalt, you actually can't have B12, which means animals like you and me and all the microanimals, right? Nematodes, arthropods, microarthropods, right? All those. They are also needing their B12 as well. So if it's not there, the compost that you put down that you worked so hard on, that you pay so much money for perhaps, is going to die. The life in it will not persist without that mineral in the soil. And so people are like, oh, I grow in pure compost. If it's pure organic matter and you don't have some mineral component, if you don't have cobalt, and yes, every plant, all plant matter has cobalt in it, but it will start to be leached out of that organic matter as those plants take it up and as you pull those plants out of your system and eat them. So you want a real solid bank in your soil of this. And so that's why the azomite, or I usually don't recommend the azomite. Isn't that they cook that in they make like popcorn, right? They're heating up the mineral until it becomes puffed. And like there's a benefit to that. But I don't think you need to go to all that length. I think just dust is good enough. And then also you're going to get all that surface area when you get that smaller dust particle. And surface area is always the name of the game. I also know a lot more about biochar. So I'd be adding biochar and not charcoal. You make the charcoal and then you inoculate it with life to make it biochar, and then you add it. So I'd be adding biochar. I would be adding rock dust. I'd be adding seaweed if I could get it. But that life, you're actually setting the stage for life. It's the life that does everything. You can put all the minerals in there, and the plant will just sit there doo-doo-doo, doo-doo-doo, and it won't be able to do anything because the plant needs a relationship there. Okay, so let's say you do the phosphorus game. You're putting down your chemical phosphorus. You got it from a store. It's great, you think. and your plant's taking it up. Most of that, almost all of it, is just washing away. The thing is, all those fertilizers are salts, so they kill the soil life. You're salting the earth, right? Like the Romans used to use dolomite to salt the earth. And so when we have fungi there, when we have mycorrhizal fungi to partner with the soil roots, they can take up 10,000 times the amount of phosphorus. Imagine that just for 1 second. You were going to spend money, and then you save 10,000 times the amount of money. Like that, like that's what's going on. Instead of nothing, it's 10,000 times like one thing. So it's really incredibly powerful when you just start having the microbiology there. And so I've studied with Dr. Elaine Ingham extensively, and then I've also studied with Dan Kittredge, learned a lot from David Montgomery. I've learned a lot from Chris Trump, the Korean natural farmer, Cuauhtemoc Villa, the Bokashi EM expert. And then I would also hit it with EM, because if there were things that were heavy metals, if there were things that were seriously toxic in my soil, then they would be tying it up. A lot of people say they eat it or make it go away. There's no way. It's not magic. So it has to go somewhere. And so at 45% organic matter, you actually create colloids, these gels in the soil that make it so that they trap those heavy metals to a certain degree. You can't like pour heavy metals on something and be like, that's great. You know what I mean? Got a lot of organic matter. But like EM has the ability to really take to you know what I mean, a certain degree. You can't like have like here's a chunk of uranium, you know, and expect like, you know, compost and compost tea and EM to make a difference. But EM has members of the consortium that have been found inside manure, like cesspools that are like digesting the stuff there. You know what I mean? Transforming it, eating it. Also like volcanic sites, radioactive waste dumps. I mean, purple non-sulfur bacteria feeds four ways. It's it feeds on light. It feeds. It's a phototrophic. It can. Yeah. It's really crazy. It's really crazy. So EM is this amazing consortium of purple non-sulfur bacteria, lactic bacteria, so lactic acid bacteria. So you probably know lactobacillus is one of them. There's a whole family of them. And then yeast. And so you're essentially pickling those things in the soil, and then it actually gets consumed by the native indigenous microorganisms. So that's what I would be doing. And I know that seems like a crazy amount of things, but let me just go over it again. It's really basic. If I was going to fix the soil, I would get organic matter in there like crazy. I would get rock dust or other form of mineral supplement, like, you know, like seaweed or something like that. And then I would add life. And so we're talking about compost, talking about compost tea, or and then I would be adding biochar along with the rock dust. And then if there's problems on the site, or if I suspect there's problems on the site, I'd be using EM. And I think everyone should have EM for cleaning, for treating stinky things. I mean, you talked about how you have pigs and they don't stink. The Korean natural farming no stink pig pen is like one of their trademarks. And I think that's so important that people understand that this stuff rocks. Like it does stuff that you think is impossible. And that's just the way soil life works. And if we can partner with that, we can build the most unbelievable soil so quickly. I know there's a lot of like hoo-ha, you know what I mean, around like the actual calculating of carbon in the atmosphere and soil loss and all that kind of stuff. But in my understanding, all of that carbon is actually the soil and the animals and the trees that is supposed to be all around us, to be the abundance of life that this earth was meant to be. And so I want to bring that back down, and I want to bring that fertility back down, and I know we can do it extraordinarily fast. And when we do that, we create the stable climates, we reverse desertification, and we create a resilience against the inevitable things that we can't control. Because, you know, I mean, it's like we have no defense against like so many of the things that so many people debate about whether they're real or not. It's like, yeah. So I mean, I was in a mountain community, right? The power went out during a snowstorm for a week, and people were like going hungry. They ran out of food in a day or two, and the stores didn't get any new food. It's like, that's not even a disaster. That's life. And it's like, what happens when an asteroid or a piece of an asteroid hits? Or there's a real solar flare like the one that happened a few years ago, except it's facing us, and it fries this computer, it fries everything around us, lights entire cities on fire. Like, what's going to happen then? Because that is literally a statistical probability that at some point that could happen again, because it already happened 100 and so years ago. So yeah, no, like we have to be prepared. And the only way to prepare is to put the earth back into congruence with itself, to create a resiliency against these kind of inevitable events, unless we're talking Star Wars and we're outside like blowing up asteroids. And I don't know if that's really possible, though people like talking about that. I like working with the soil, not and it's like science fiction's fun. You know what I mean? Talking about going to space and shooting lasers and, you know, living on Mars and not thinking about the consequences of like trying to ever move back from Mars and what that would do to your body and, you know, like all those kinds of things. We've got this earth, we've got this chance, we've got this opportunity. We can flip the soils, we can bring back the forests, we can rewild the oceans. I was talking to someone this week about this. The ocean soils are endless. Like all the carbon that's a problem is in the top layer of the ocean. If you actually put it down, the acidifying stuff, if you actually put it down where the fungal digestion vat of the ocean is, it just eats it. So there's all this stuff. There's so much stuff on the table. Like whatever way you want to cut the problem and say, well, I think it's this, well, I think it's that. It's like the solutions are already here and they're beneficial for everyone. Like the marine permaculture with the upwelling, they're bringing cold water up, and they've already proven that they can save the coral reefs this way. So the simple technology, and this is simple technology, it's not expensive, it's easy to create, you can put them up everywhere. We can save all the coral reefs, and not only that, we can bring back all the coastal life. So we've got all the answers, we've got all the technology, we've had the answers, you know, biodynamic, we've had indigenous, like throughout time, indigenous examples. I'm not saying every indigenous culture had everything right. It's important not to say that. But there are examples. We have the science. We have the answers. It's really about just taking care of our own crap. Because it's like, what's the hang up on the soil really comes down to the fact that we're not completing the loop. It's like the biodynamic, right? It's like we're missing the cycles. And that's really what Steiner was all about. That's what biodynamic farming is, I feel, is all about. I have many friends who are biodynamic farmers, and I've studied it. I don't professionally teach it. I teach permaculture, but it's really, really important that all these practices get a second glance, or five, because the hour is late and we're the only ones that are really responsible for our own like safety and welfare at this point. It's like we're all riding in a vehicle where like the driver's asleep at the wheel. And like we grew up in the 80s thinking like there was like order to the world. I feel like there is no order to the world. Like there, you know what I mean? Things are careening. And we have no safety nets. Like there's no wise people like hedging their bets and like, well, I did half my farm this way, but half of it's permaculture because, you know, just in case, you know, like when that becomes normal, our society, our culture is going to be in such a different level of being, interacting, and thinking. So. Yeah, I feel like we're at a cusp moment where these conversations are finally being had.
Well, there's good news and there's bad news, Matt. And the good news is that we've been through many catastrophes. The Bible, there's a few in there, but we've made it because you and I are having a conversation. So the fact that the human
Yeah,
species
we're
is
survivors.
yeah, the human species is resilient, we're going to make it. And in order to make it, those that are interested in making it need to learn the techniques we're talking about. And it begins with growing soil so that your family can be healthy. This is what the way it was in the past. These are the ancient ways. And it begins with having the minerals present while you add the biological material to your soil. You want that granite dust, you want that stone meal, whatever you get, put it in there. Rock dust, do it now. It makes tastier, more vitaminized, mineralized foods. It creates immunity to insect infestation, worms and fungi, and all kinds of plant diseases. It improves the keeping and shipping quality of foods for homesteaders, enabling them to survive when those fed on manure and chemicals actually perish. Stone meal will also help plants resist drought and frost, enabling them to survive when manure and chemical fertilizers are used in different ways. Stone meal will produce larger crops, which will be more profitable if you're a farmer, but you need the biological mycorrhiza like you're nuts about, because it's the mycorrhiza that takes the dust and sticks the mineral right up in the plant's arse, which is exactly what you need for healthy, tasty food. I know, I said it. So we're gonna. I have to close up. This has been an awesome conversation. I'll give you 5 minutes to sum up what we discussed and maybe what we'll talk about next.
Yeah, well, what we covered was that biodynamic was this linchpin between the way that we used to farm and with organic farming. It was the predecessor to all organic farming. We talked about how biodynamic was attacked for actually speaking the truth about how our bodies work, about how the soil works, about how we should be looking at our farms as living organisms. And permaculture, we talked about how permaculture really built upon that, really stood on the shoulders of Rudolf Steiner and other people like him. There's actually a long list of people that I would say permaculture stands on the shoulders of. Tangent. But then we talked about how biodynamic was also influenced by this Hensel. What's his name? Hensel?
Hansel.
Yeah. So Jay Hensel. Yeah, about how rock dust was really the mineral component was the linchpin in all of this, and that NPK was not really what you were after, and that you wanted this broad spectrum of minerals that is found only in this stone meal or rock dust, what have you. And then we started talking about how soil is the primary modality for all life interacts with, and how we are made of soil, we are soil beings, and about how without those critical micronutrients, trace elements, we actually don't feel fully human. And when people are really out of balance, and they've proven this, they test the blood of the serial killers and crazy folks they catch, and almost always they've got a crazy imbalance of heavy metals in their body. So these things can screw us up or heal us, but they have to be in balance to heal us, and protect us when we do have exposures, because that's life too. And so we talked about the importance of soil and how it really is the linchpin in all these systems and all these disasters that could be coming. It's the soil that is actually the thing that will protect us, feed us, and carry us into the future. And I would like to just say that if you don't know where to start, just start with a compost heap. If you're like, oh, don't they stink? Go buy some EM. EM is effective microbes, and you can get EM1 from Terraganics or something. Yeah, Terraganics, or you can get it from a friend locally. And if you just start asking, you'll find people who do this. All you have to do to scale it up from that one bottle is do 1 part molasses, 1 part EM, and 20 parts water. Wait 2 weeks, and then you can put that on your compost heap, and literally the nitrogenous smells, the ammonia smells, the stinky smells, the putrefaction will all be arrested, and all those bad smells will instead be fermented in place and turned completely into amino acids that can be uptaken by the plants as plant food readily. So this is a way that you can have that passive, easy compost. And you can turn it, you know what I mean, and make it go really fast, just like any other compost, but you only have to turn it every week. You don't have to turn it every couple days or every other day like with the regular thermophilic compost. So I really recommend, because it suddenly doesn't stink, it happens faster, it's less work, and your plants will love it. So just using EM, just using a static compost that you move around every once in a while to aerate it, to make sure that it stays aerobic, you will be able to start on this process, and it will quickly, and you'll see it. You'll be like, wow, this section's dark black dirt. That's compost. And that's all you need to start. The life is in it. And by the way, this is a cool thing. Compost, you start making it, the thermophilic microbes that make it hot and break it down, where do they come from? Where do they go? We don't know. We literally don't know. These things appear and disappear. So there's a lot to learn here. There's a lot of amazing, amazing unknowns that we're just getting to know. And it's in many ways just as magical as Rudolf Steiner, makes it out to be in his original writings. So next time we could probably dive deeper into soil science and soil health, because soil health leads right into the microbiome of our bodies, the fungal biome, the mycobiome of our bodies, and that's what makes us who we are. So the soil that we cultivate is our future selves and our future bodies, then the bodies of our future children, our grandchildren, the whole thing. It's all there. So just start there and stay tuned.
It's been a pleasure, Matt. Soil is the solution. Permaculture is the solution. There is no permaculture without soil. And you heard it here first. Arrest the putrefaction. Get the EM. Do it now. Yes, so you want to build soils, you want to build that mycorrhiza, biologicals, you want to get that compost going, make those compost teas, get the EM, make your own EM. He just gave you the recipe. It's been a pleasure, Matt Powers. Hours of Powers with Matt. Check him out here at ThePermacultureStudent.com. ThePermacultureStudent.com. Be safe, everyone. We love you.